Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
There has never been a better time, at least economically, to be a dentist than right now. I say that having been in the profession for a little over 30 years, since the early 90s, I've never seen a time where there was more opportunity for growth and expansion than 2023. This is it. There are a number of trends that we've been monitoring over the years. I've talked a little bit about them here and there. They're all coming to a head. This is it, folks. And you may wonder when you hear me say that, well, Jeff, what are you talking about? You know, we have DSOs, we have PPOs lowering fees, we have 17% inflation almost in the last 3 years, and I can't find staff. How has there never been a better time? I'm telling you, there hasn't been. And what I want to do in this episode is I want to show you how I came to this conclusion. I'll give you some specific facts and figures, and then I want to go over with you what these opportunities are so that you can take advantage of them. Now, if you are a dental student or you're an associate, maybe you just started your practice or you've been in practice for 20 years, this applies to you. These opportunities are happening now, and they're going to be happening probably over the next 5 to 7, maybe 8 years from now. This is the time. This past week, we've been presenting the MGE Owners Conference. And to give you a bit of an idea of MGE, I don't know how we compare to other companies size-wise, but we service about 15,000 people per year. We have a 55,000 square foot office in Florida in the Tampa Bay area and a 6,000 square foot office in Anaheim. And we have our Owners Conference once a year. Okay. Our Owners Conference is a graduate service. So if you graduated the program 5 years ago and you want to stay connected, you come to the Owners Conference, you see all your old friends, you sort of recharge the batteries. And it's usually our biggest service of the year. It's our biggest seminar of the year because you have, current clients and past clients coming back. Well, I normally start the Owners Conference off with sort of a state of things, state of the profession. What's happening in the profession, what's happening economically, what's happening in the labor market with staff and so on. And I can tell you, with this year, our clients are fired up. We've been going over some of this stuff because, as I mentioned, these are trends that have been going for a while, and people are fired up right now. Some of them are already into it. Others are ready to do it. This is at least something you're going to want to take a look at if you're ambitious, or you want to create some growth. This is something you're going to want to look at. So now, how did I come to this conclusion? Well, I'm going to explain this in 4 parts. Now, these 4 parts do have some numbers in them. Sorry, I can't do it without the numbers. But if you're listening to this in your car or, while you're going for a walk or whatever on a headphone, you can follow along. I'll keep the numbers somewhat simple so they're easily communicatable. But if you want to look at all the numbers that sort of constitute this thing and the charts and stuff that go with it, I took some slides from my show from this Owners Conference and I turned them into a PDF that you can download. If you go to the episode webpage, just click the link and you download it and you can listen to it and follow along, or you can look at them later. They're pretty self-explanatory. This data comes from a number of different places, including the ADA and some government organizations and things like this. All right. So what are these 4 things that I'm going to be covering? I'm going to be covering the current supply of dentists and the demographics of these dentists, primarily age. I'm going to be looking at the projected future supply of dentists versus projected U.S. population. We're going to take a look at what's happening with DSOs. And then I'm going to show you what we're projecting is going to happen. And this is, like I said, this is what we're sharing with the clients. Bits and pieces we've shared, because again, as I mentioned, I do this once a year. This is sort of our messaging for the year to our client base. Here are the opportunities. This is where you should be looking. And people are already acting on it. And I can tell you it's phenomenal. All right. So let's take a look at our first thing here, which is, how much is the profession growing? How many dentists are there in the United States, and is it growing? Well, in 2020, there were 201,117 doctors in the U.S. Now, 21% of these are specialists. Okay. So about 160,000 GPs. In 2021, there are 201,927 dentists. So it grew by 0.04%. Not a lot. It went 201,117 to 201,927. It grew by about 810 doctors. From 2021 to 2022, in 2022, we had 202,536 doctors. So it grew by about roughly 600 doctors, which is 0.03%. It's not rapidly growing right now. Okay, and then this breaks down by, so we have these 202,000 dentists in the U.S. How does this break down by age? Well, I've got a chart here, but to give you an idea, dentists 55 and over, okay? And again, I'm going over ages not as a, old, young, or whatever. It's just, if you're 55 years old, you're not looking at practicing for another 30 years. You're going to want to, cut back, retire, or whatever. It's sort of the career arc. Whereas if you're 27, you probably are looking at practicing for 30 years. So this number has some bearing. So dentists 55 and over right now comprise about 35% of the profession. Okay. There's about 39,000 dentists 55 and over, or 55 to 64, and 32,000 dentists who are 65 and over. Okay. The largest group, demographically from an age perspective of dentists is dentists between 35 and 44, which is a little over 50,000. Okay. But to make up this whole 202,000. And I have this chart in here if you want to look at it. So that's how that breaks down. Now, what does the future look like? Who's in dental school? Well, let's take a look. Total U.S. dental school enrollment in 2021 and 2022 school year was 26,228. That's how many people were enrolled in dental school, all 4 years. In 2020 and 2021, that number was 25,995. So we basically went up by about 0.9%. We went from 25,995 students to 26,228. It grew by 233 students. So not a ton, a 0.9% growth. First year enrollments in 2020 and 2021 were 6,317. First year enrollments the following year, 2021-22, were 6,358. That grew by 41 students. This isn't meteoric, is it? I mean, it's growing, but not very fast. And keep one other number in mind. The average U.S. dentist retirement age is 67.9. That's the average. And that number has bounced around from 69 to 68. That number was as of 2021. We don't have the 2022 number yet. Is 67.9 years of age is the average retirement age. Okay. Now, so that's where the profession's going. It's not growing that fast. But what about population, U.S. population? Well, let's take a look at that. In May of 2022, U.S. population was 333,287,557. So about 333,300,000. Okay. U.S. population in May of this year, this month, is 336,486,000. So that's increased by about almost 3.2 million people in just the last year. So we've gone from 333 and change to 336 and a half. Now, to give you an idea, because we don't have our 2023 dentist numbers yet, let's look at growth back from 2021 to 2022. We added 810 net dentists between 2021 and 2022. In the last year, May of 2022 to 23, we added over 3 million people. Okay. So the population is growing faster than the number of doctors. Okay. Now, what is U.S. population projected to be over the next, I was going to say 5 and 10 years. It's really 4 and 8 years because I have or 4 and 9 years because I have 2027 and 2032. Projected population by 2027 is about 341,700,000. And projected population by 2032 is 364, almost 365 million. Let's round it off, especially if you don't have the numbers in front of you. So we've gone from about 333 million last year to 336 and a half this year. We're projected to go to 341 and change by 2027 and 364, almost 65 million by 2032. So you can see the population is going to continue growing. So then what I did is using some of the ADA's numbers, especially for dentists entering and leaving the profession, projecting students entering the profession based on the current level of growth, did a little chart And I'll give you some of the highlights. You can look at this if you download it. But first, let me read you a quote from the ADA, because there's a point of agreement between me and the ADA and their statistics. And I'm not trying to, the ADA is great. They come out with some great stuff. But I did base some of this off the ADA's numbers, but then also some of the industry trends that we here at MGE observe. But the ADA's viewpoint is this. There's a quote, and I have this for you in the PDF. You want to look at it. It says, HPI, which is the Health Policy Institute for the ADA, dentist workforce model, HPI's dentist workforce model, projects that dentists per capita will be stable through 2025 and then will increase through 2040, meaning that there will be less patients per dentist by 2040. That's where I don't 100% agree, because at our current rate, because then you're really making a big prediction, because also we have no idea on population. We have an idea, we have projections, but all of this is projections. But I can't necessarily predict how many kids are going to go to dental school, and is it going to keep growing at the rate it's been growing the last couple of years? So we have a slight divergence from them. And I've got this projected growth graph, but to give you an idea, here's what we're projecting. We're projecting that, we got our 202,000 dentists now. We're projecting by 2027, we'll have about 206,000. And by 2032, we'll have almost 212,000 dentists. Now, you may wonder, how in 9 years are we only going to add about 10,000 dentists? That doesn't make sense, does it? Because, we have 26,000 kids in school now. Well, I want you to remember something, and this is going to become very relevant, okay, as we go through. 35% of the profession is over 55, okay? So now, a couple other points to keep in mind here to show you how we came to this conclusion. It's another quote from the ADA on solo practices. It says, and this is in the download, fewer dentists are working as solo practitioners. About 63% of private practice dentists were in solo practice in 1999. That proportion decreased to 46% in 2021. So dentists who are practicing on their own back in 1999, 65% of doctors were practicing on their own. Now 46% are practicing on their own. Okay, so that's dropping. Then we get into practice ownership with dentists. So we have another quote here. Practice ownership among dentists in private practice has been declining over the years, dropping from 84.7% in 2005 to 73% in 2021. So back in 2005, 84.7% of dentists own a practice. Now it's 73%. And here's what I'm talking about, or here's where rather what I'm talking about will become a little bit more real. I have a chart, which again, you can download, but I'm going to give you a couple of big highlights. Basically, it's a chart which goes from 2005 through 2021, which is the most recent year we have these metrics, okay? And it's broken down by percentage of dentists by age group that own a practice. So I'll say that again. Percentage of dentists by age group. In other words, if you have the age group, and they break down for every 10 years, right? So how many dentists between 55 and 64 own a practice? How many dentists under 30 own a practice? Okay. So keep in mind that practice ownership has been declining. Okay. So now to give you an idea, back in 2005, if you were a dentist under 30, 25.4% of you would have owned a practice. Okay. So if you had a group of dentists under 30, 1 out of 4 would have owned a dental practice. Okay. Back in 2005. That number now is 9.5%. So I'll say that again. Back in 2005, 1 out of 4 dentists under 30 own a dental practice. Now less than 1 out of 10 dentists under 30 own a dental practice. Okay. That's the first thing. How about dentists between, 30 and 34? So if you took a group of dentists between 30 and 34 back in 2005, 55% of them would have owned a dental practice. So if you had a group of 100 dentists, under or between 30 and 35, or 30 and 34 rather, you had 100 of them, 55 of them would have owned a dental practice. That's pretty good. How about now? 2021, 34.2% own a dental practice between the age of 30 and 34. So if you had a group of 100, 34 of them own a practice. 2005, 55 of them owned a practice. So what you're seeing is younger dentists either aren't buying practices or they are buying them later. So if we go back to this, 73% of dentists own a practice, right? Or practice ownership is at 73%. Who owns all these practices? Well, the majority of practices, okay, are owned by the highest demographic as far as percentage of practice ownership is dentists 55 to 64. 90% of those doctors own a practice. Now, some of these might be partnerships, but they own a practice if they are 55 to 64. The next group coming in at close to 90% is 45 to 54. And then 65 and over is number 3, which ownership at 65 and over is over 84%. So of all these practices that are owned, right, out of the top 3 demographics, age demographics or age groups, whatever you want to call it, that own these dental practices, 2 of the top 3 are 55 and over. Okay, so the majority of ownership rests in about 35% of the profession. Okay, so now I then broke this down where I broke down, okay, how many doctors are there, right? And by age group, and then what percentage or number of them, because we have a percentage that are owners, right? So the number of them that actually own a practice. And again, I had you use 2021 numbers because that's the latest metric we have or data we have as far as practice ownership goes. So we have out of the 201,319 dentists in 2021, 147,383 owned practices. Okay. Well, 62 to 63,000 of these 147,000 practices were owned by dentists 55 and over. Okay. 43.15% of the practices in the U.S. are owned by doctors 55 and over. Okay. So do you see where we're going with this? You've got a bit of a weird situation developing, which now has developed and has been developing over the years, which is normally the cycle, the way it used to work is a graduating student, take their boards. In a lot of cases, way back when, would just go and buy a practice, or maybe they'd associate for a year or two and then they'd buy an office. That was the normal cycle, and they'd buy it from a retiring dentist, Well, the younger doctors are not buying practices, or if they are waiting a long time. All right. So now we get to our next, metric here, which is where this all starts to make a lot more sense. We have what we call the outflow rate over a 5-year period. And I'm sorry, folks, this is just very data heavy, but this is such a huge opportunity and it does present better visually, but I wanted to get this message to you guys. We have that outflow rate. What does that mean? It basically means if you take a 5-year period, by age group, what percentage of those doctors after 5 years will no longer be practicing? Okay, so if I took a group of doctors who were, 45, 100 of them, right? After a 5-year period, some of them would no longer be practicing dentistry. What percentage would that be? That's, in other words, this is from the ADA study. Okay, or from an ADA study, rather. So the outflow rate over a 5-year period for dentists up to 54 years of age ranges from 2.8 to 4.1%. So at the high end, if you have a group of doctors who are under 54, okay, let's say it's 100 doctors under 54, 4 of them, 4.1% at the high end, would not be practicing 5 years later. They might have changed careers, retired, quit, whatever it was. Okay, so it's a very low exit or outflow rate. Okay, now we bump up. If we go to the 55 to 64 age bracket, the outflow rate is 19.5% over a 5-year period. So if I had 100 doctors who were between the ages of 55 and 64 in 2023, in 2028, and I had 100 of them, remember? In 2028, 20 of them would no longer be practicing. They might have retired, gone off to do something else, whatever. But 20 out of the 100 would no longer be practicing 5 years later. This is statistically. Now, what about if I had a group of doctors who were 65 and over? What's the outflow or exit rate there? Well, the outflow or exit rate is 54.5%. So again, if I had a group of 100 doctors and they were 65 and over in 2023, in 2028, 54 of them would no longer be practicing. More than half. Okay. So I want you to remember, we have a 20% outflow rate, 55 to 64, and a 54.5% outflow rate, 65 and over. That demographic, that age group owns 43.15% of dental practices in the United States of America. So you go, okay, well, a lot of them are going to be leaving practice, and I have, over a 5-year period, and I have these numbers broken down, but who's going to buy the practices? Because the young people aren't, based upon current, trends and statistics. So let's get into this a little bit more. So over the next 5 years, if we take doctors 55 to 64, which again, this is based off the 2021 numbers, there were 36,604 doctors who fell into that age bracket. Okay. Potentially, and remember that group, 90% of them own dental practices. I'll say that again, but I'll add in another number. These numbers we had here, 55 to 64 years of age, there were 40,626 doctors, which means, and 90% of them owned a dental practice, remember? So that means that 36,604 of these doctors were practice owners, 90%. All right. So if 20% of those leave dentistry over a 5-year period, that's 7,137. Now, if they all own their own offices, that's 7,137 practices that will be for sale. Now, some of these might be partnerships, so it might be less practices, but that's a considerable number of dental practices. This is over a 5-year period, okay? Number one. But let's look at 65 and over. Well, how many doctors were in that category? Well, we had 31,978 doctors back in 2021. All right. And of that, 84.4% of them owned a practice, which means we had 26,989 practices. And again, some of these up to that many, because some of these might have been partnerships. Okay. So again, think this thing through. 54.4% of those are going to exit the profession over a 5-year period. That's 14,709 offices. So we got 7,137 in the 55 to 64 demographic, potentially for sale, and up to 14,709 practices for sale in the 65 and over demographic, which is about 21,000, almost 22,000. Again, some of these might be partnerships, so it might be less practices that would be potentially for sale over a 5-year period. Okay. That's what's happening right now. And you see it, it's just general demographics. I went over this a few weeks ago when I was going over the labor market. Part of the issue with the labor market is you had a lot of people who, from the baby boomer generation, that have now reached peak retirement age. A large portion of that generation has reached peak retirement age. That generation was way larger than my generation, Generation X, okay? And it's about the size of millennials. But to give you an idea, right now there are more people in their late 50s in the United States than there are people 5 years old to 9 years old, okay? The baby boom was truly a baby boom, and these folks are retiring. That's part of what's tightened up the job market a bit. So you have a lot of people leaving the job market, okay? So that same thing is playing out in dentistry to one degree or another. So now, you'd normally, like I said, expect these practices, they'd want to retire, they bring in, a young associate, and they would sell the practice to that associate. And sure, that's still happening, but most younger doctors aren't buying offices. So where are all these offices going to go? Well, you might go, well, Jeff, they're going to go to DSOs. DSOs are going to buy them all, of course. Well, no, they're not. So let's look at a couple of DSO statistics for just a second. I have some old stats on DSO growth. I haven't found anything much new recently, but back in 2017, 8.8% of dentists in the U.S. worked for a DSO or were associated with a DSO. This was 2017. 2019, that went up to 10.4% of dentists. Okay. So what I don't know is, because in 2020, corporate took the hit just like you did. In some cases, they weren't as resilient as a private practice. So I don't know what that percentage is now. But let's say it's 10% of dentists work for DSOs, and we have about 200,000 dentists. That's 20,000 doctors. But what about future doctors? Well, dental school seniors who have been surveyed, what do you plan to do when you graduate? Right now, that number that planned to work for a DSO has been steadily growing over the years. Back in 2015, that number was 12%. In 2020, it was 30%. 2022, 35% of dental school seniors plan to go work for a DSO. And it's not hard to see why DSOs promote very heavily to dental students. They have for years because they're looking for, doctors. Obviously, it's a bit of a no-brainer. If you are a dental student listening and you're one of that 35%, I would say don't do it. You have a much better opportunity in private practice. Go associate for somebody, mentor with them for a while, and then buy an office. If you're an associate, you've been thinking about it, now's the time, folks. This is the time. This is where this is happening. So that's what's happening with the DSOs. But now as far as, are the DSOs going to buy all these offices? Well, no, they're not, right? And we know that the people coming out aren't necessarily going to buy them because, a lot of these folks aren't buying offices or they're waiting. And again, with a younger dentist, I understand they have several $100,000 in student debt. Maybe their risk appetite isn't that high to want to take on a $350,000 or $500 or whatever $1,000 loan to buy an office. I get it, right? But DSOs have a very specific way they acquire practices. Generally speaking, they're going to want a practice that's doing at least 1 to 1.2, like 100,000 a month, 1.2, 1.5 or more per year. That's what they're looking for. Now, why? Because they're going to buy this already profitable practice and put some specialists in it and add some stuff and try to make more money out of it. Okay. And this is a bit of a problem. It's something that we've run into with our clients because, in some cases, we have clients doing 8, 10 million a year, 5 million a year, 3 million a year. Even with the old valuation model that used to be used in dentistry of 70% of last year's collections. If I walk up to somebody, I'm a doctor and I'm just a solo practitioner, I'm looking at buying a practice, or I'm an associate and I want to buy an office. If I go up to somebody who's doing 3, 4 million a year, I'm not going to come up with $2.1 to $2.8 million to buy this office. There's no way. Nobody's going to give me that money, number one. But number two, a DSO is going to come in and pay multiples of EBITDA, which, I talked about that a few episodes. You can look it up, EBITDA. It's kind of like profit. There's a little bit of a difference, but know that. But I've seen offices doing 4 million a year sell for like $9 to $10 million. Okay. So they have a different valuation formula. So it's more attractive. They can buy the office for more money. So these larger practices aren't necessarily, I know this because this happens to our clients, folks. I know this because, the DSO is going to come along and offer, 1.5, twice, 3 times the amount of money that a private buyer would offer. And the private buyer can't get that kind of money anyway. So the DSOs are generally looking for a larger practice. So we just went over that between our 55 and over bracket, we potentially have 20,000 practices over a 5-year period that potentially could be for sale. Might be less because of some partnerships. So are all of those doing 1.2 or more per year? Absolutely not. Of course they're not. And a lot of them are doing a lot less. And the reason why corporate doesn't buy these offices doing less than that is scaling a business is not what corporate does. Our clients do it. They'll buy an office doing 300,000 a year and they'll get it up to, $1 million, or they'll take their own practice and build it up. But corporate doesn't do that. That is not their model. So these offices that are doing less than that are not on their radar. And I would advise firmly against trying to compete with corporate to purchase one of these humongous offices. Why would you want to do that? Just scale the thing yourself. If you want a business, you should know how to scale it. Okay. So what's the opportunity here? The opportunity is if you have a practice and you're looking for a growth opportunity, you can get some additional locations. Quite a few of them are going to be on the market over the next 5 to 7 years. If you're an associate, now is the time to buy a practice. If you're a dental student, right? Some of these practices might come for sale once you've graduated past your boards. You can practice associate for a little bit and then you can buy a practice, or you can work for somebody who's running this model, which I'll explain in just a second. But additional locations is the opportunity. Now, I'll add a little caveat in there, which is if your current location is doing horribly and it's not going well, I probably wouldn't buy an additional location. That's going to get you into trouble because you're going to take whatever problems you have. I did a couple episodes on this, the do's and don'ts of additional locations. You're just going to bring those problems to location 2. So you want to make sure that location 1 is in good shape before you go jumping off into location 2. We can help you with that. It's like, you may remember Sabri from prior episodes, our deputy chief operating officer. She talks to our clients about building a brick house in the Three Little Piggies vein. You don't want the straw house or the wood house. You want the brick house. Because economies go up and down, right? You want something that can thrive, not just survive, but thrive in any type of economic conditions. So that's what you want for Office One. We can help you with that. Okay. But, so before you go grabbing other offices, make sure you have that secure. Our clients do that. Like at our owners conference this weekend, I'm talking to one client who bought 4 offices in the last year. Because again, I told you, these are trends we've been talking to our clients about for a little bit. They've all culminated now. Here's the tidal wave. Okay. 4 offices in the last year. Talked to another client who has 6, another one that has 8. Talked to another one who, bought a practice doing $30,000 a month. This is location 2, folks, and got it doing 100 in a couple of months. These opportunities are there, assuming location 1 is in halfway decent shape. I mean, I guess I could make an argument. Let's say you have an office and it's just 100% HMO and you go, look, the idea of going fee for service to this thing just isn't, real to me, because a lot of our clients are going fee for service as well. Quite a few are out of PPOs now or they're in the process of getting out. We're advising all of our clients to get out 100%. But, say you had a situation like that and it kind of runs and it's a little profitable and whatever. And then another opportunity comes up and you're not necessarily having to be chairside all the time. Well, then, okay, fine. But for the most part, you want to make sure location 1 is in good shape. So what are these locations you're looking for? Let's say you were an associate doctor and you go, Jeff, I'm looking at buying a practice. Because buying an existing practice, sure, it isn't the exact way that you want it, but you've at least got some flow going on in there. It's usually a little bit easier than starting from scratch. What would you be looking for? Whether you're an associate buying an office or, an established doctor looking at an additional location. You're looking for a location that's smaller, maybe 3, 4, 5 chairs, at least 3. 2 just doesn't work. Okay. And it's maybe doing $200,000 to $500,000 a year. That's what you're looking for. Something small that you can scale. There's a number of advantages to this. Number 1, it's all upside from there. If it's doing 300, 350 a year, it's all upside. Number 2, it's not going to cost you a lot to buy that practice. Because like I said, that standard dental valuation model of 70% of last year's collections works for these practices. Nobody's coming in saying, I'm going to give you a multiplier or a multiple of your profit. That's not what's happening. They're giving it's 70%. Now that number can fluctuate. And I know if you're listening from Canada, that number is higher, but generally speaking, 70 has been the number that's been there since I entered the profession. That's what practice is sold for. If you collected 500,000 last year, you got 350 for that practice. Now, that number might go down if your equipment is really old and kind of, janky and breaking. Okay. It might be 60 or 65%, maybe 75 if it's a newer practice. You just built it out. You put in some beautiful equipment. You might get a little bit more, and for that matter, if you're going around looking for an office and somebody tells you, I want 100% of last year's collections, I just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I think that's too much. Okay. So that's the number that works. And like I told you, our clients are doing this. This is how they're acquiring these practices. That's the valuation they're using. They're not competing with the DSO to buy these offices because these aren't on the DSO's radar. And obviously there's going to be some regionality to this. And this is the unfortunate thing about buying a dental office is that if I want to buy a house or a condo, I go to a realtor and they look at, we probably heard this term, the MLS. I think it's the multiple listing service, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Let me know. Give me some feedback. Let me know if I'm wrong or I'll just Google it. But it's the MLS. So if you list a house, it goes in the MLS pretty much 100% of the time. Okay. Especially if a broker is listing your house, they have to put it up there. There is no MLS for dentistry, unfortunately. It's a very fragmented area, field in the sense of usually individual brokers have different listings. So you have to do a little bit more work on this one to find the practice that you're looking for sometimes. Inventory for practices is going to depend on the region, but what I am seeing is, especially here in Florida, which was a very desirable place for a lot of doctors to move because the population's growing, we have beaches, it's sunny and so on. So we had a large influx of dentists moving into the state. So about a year ago, we saw practices moving pretty quick, and these were mainly people relocating. Okay. But what we're seeing now is there's still some inventory. It's not a ton, but it's not moving as fast anymore. And these are these practices that, you'd want to be looking at. You might have a lot of inventory in the state that you're in, and this may fit the bill for you. And as far as financing it, sure, right now interest rates are higher. You could, but you just pay it off. It doesn't have to take forever to pay the loan off. Or in some cases, depending on the circumstances of the doctor you're buying from, they may be willing to hold the note. You never know. It's always a possibility, especially if there's not a lot of people trying to buy their office. You're going to give them a down payment and, you're going to pay them payments over 5 years to pay it off. And maybe you get a better rate than if you went to, your local bank to get a loan or one of these, practice financing companies, and you might be able to actually have them hold the note. And this way you're also not racking up tons and tons of notes with banks at that point too. But that's what we're looking for here. The other thing, the reason we're looking for this is low months are then not catastrophic. If you go buy a big practice, let's say it's doing 150 a month, and you have a month where you do 100 during the transition, well, that just ate into a large amount of your working capital at that point. Whereas if you buy an office doing 30,000 and it does 25,000 the next month, it's not like the end of the world. Okay. So that's the other advantage. And the last one is there are a lot of these opportunities. We're seeing more and more and more. And like I told you, our clients are doing this. I'm seeing it every day. Okay. So now one other thing I would add. So now what does this leave? All these doctors who maybe aren't buying practices, right when they're coming out because they got a lot of debt or whatever other considerations that they have that are preventing them. And it's fine. Look, everybody has to do what makes them happy, right? But just because dentists under 35 or even under 30 aren't big practice buyers, that doesn't mean necessarily that they don't want to own a practice. That's not what that means. They just maybe don't feel it's the right time. Well, here's what I would do. And again, this is what we're encouraging our clients to do. When you buy an office, in some cases, the person you bought the office from is willing to stick around for a little bit. In other cases, you're having to look for an associate pretty quickly. Well, if you're a younger dentist, this is a great opportunity, number one, to work with an experienced doctor. But number two, this may be a potential future partner. I would love to do that. So I find some young doctors, maybe been working for a couple years and they want an ownership opportunity, but they just don't have the resources for it, right? Well, okay, I'd bring them in and, put them in the practice, and I'd probably draft 3 agreements. I'd draft a associate agreement, a buy-in agreement, and maybe even a buyout agreement if you were looking at possibly selling them the practice eventually, but at least a buy-in. Because let's say this really works between you and this new associate. Well, this is a partner. You could buy the next practice with them together. You could end up with a bunch of partners and you continue to replicate this model. And eventually you're working with, 7, 8 other doctors. Coverage would be easy if someone wants to take a vacation, but that owns a ton of practices and they're all privately owned. And you're keeping the idea of the private practice of dentistry alive. But because that's the way it used to go. So this is the opportunity. So to summarize all this, we have the U.S. population is currently outpacing the growth of the profession. We have, despite the profession getting younger, the number of dental students may not be keeping up with the rate at which the profession needs to grow if you count the attrition in the profession with people leaving. Dentists in solo practice are dropping off. 35% of students want to join DSOs. And between overall practice ownership dropping, less younger dentists buying practices, 43% of offices in the U.S. owned by doctors 55 and over, a ton of practices will be available over the next 5, maybe 8 years. I know it took a while to explain it. I apologize for that. I'm super excited about this. I'm watching our clients do it. It's really cool. And, again, the funny thing, like I said, economies go up and down. But if you take a look at it, usually when people make their big hits, at times like this, sometimes people will get into the frame of mind. This is where they need to hold back and be careful. But this is usually where, if you're smart about it, you can grab opportunities that would not normally exist during, rosier times. Okay. Everything's great. Everybody's doing well. Well, when everything's not great, well, then people who really are prepared do well, and people who are really prepared can take advantage of opportunities. So folks, I hope that helps. If you have any questions about some of the stuff I went over in this podcast, you can email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com. Don't forget to download the PDF, which has all these slides with all these numbers on it. I apologize for all the numbers, but they're all there on the episode webpage. If you need any help of any kind, you can contact us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. So folks, there's the opportunity. You know, one thing I should mention, sorry, I meant to mention this earlier. If you're looking at a practice, if one comes available, we do have a practice acquisition checklist, which will also put as a download. You can download that and you can see if it kind of fits the bill. And if you want someone to help with it, we can. But otherwise, folks, here's the opportunity. It's there. It's there, and it's just there for the taking. I hope you take advantage of it. Let me know how it goes, and we'll see you at the next episode.